My name is Lucas Williams, and I'm 32 years old. This happened in the spring of last year, and not a day has gone by that I don't think about it. It started as a harmless idea, a camping trip to Kmore Trail in West Virginia with my boyfriend Sam, my best friend Derek, and his girlfriend Tina. I wanted content for my YouTube channel, where I explore eerie, offbeat places. This trip would change my life. We rolled into town just after noon, our RV kicking up dust as we parked near the trailhead. Kmore was a legend, an old mining town buried deep in the woods, abandoned for decades. The locals whispered about disappearances, ghost sightings, and curses, but I chalked it up to superstition. A good story, I thought, nothing more. Sam, 30, and the most grounded of us, frowned at the map. Trail looks rough. You sure we're ready for this? Of course, I said, adjusting the strap on my camera bag. It's a couple of miles in, and we're only staying overnight. We'll be fine. Tina, 26, was already uneasy. I don't know, Lucas. I read that people hear things out there, like mining sounds, tools, voices. That's the point, I replied, brushing it off. Derek, 29, my partner in crime for every harebrained adventure, grinned. We're here to find something creepy. He slung his bag over his shoulder and headed down the trail. The hike to the site was harder than I'd anticipated. The trail was steep, overgrown in places, and unmarked where landslides had swallowed parts of it. By the time we reached the remnants of Kmore, the sun was low and a cool mist was rolling in. We set up camp near the ruins of an old mining structure, just a skeleton of rusted metal and rotting wood. It didn't take long for things to go wrong. Damn it, Sam cursed as he unpacked his tent. The poles are bent. This thing's useless. Use the tarp, I suggested, already fiddling with my camera. That's when I noticed the battery meter, drained. I had charged it before we left. Mine's doing it too, Tina said, holding up her flickering flashlight. Great, Derek muttered. Ghosts hate LED lights, huh? The first oddity came as we explored. Derek found an old miner's helmet lying on a collapsed beam. It was perfect for the video. I took out my phone to snap a picture, but by the time I turned back, the helmet was gone. You moved it, I said. I didn't touch it, Derek replied, his grin fading from his face. Later, as we sat by the fire, Tina froze. Did you hear that? Hear what? I asked. She pointed into the trees, tapping like metal on stone. We listened. At first, nothing. Then, faint and rhythmic, a metallic clang echoed from the direction of the mine shaft. It sounded like pickaxes, steady and deliberate. Probably the wind, I said, but Sam's expression told me he wasn't convinced. The tapping grew louder as the night deepened. Derek, ever the skeptic, stood up and called into the woods. Hey, ghost miners, we brought beer! Shut up, Derek, Tina hissed. Sam scanned the tree line with his flashlight. It's not the wind, he said, his voice tight. Something's out there. Shadows flickered between the trees, but whenever the light hit them, there was nothing, just the whisper of leaves in the breeze. Then the footsteps started, heavy, slow, deliberate, coming closer. We huddled by the fire. Tina clutched Derek's arm, and even he had gone pale. A figure emerged from the darkness, a man-shaped silhouette, blacker than the shadows around it, with hollow pits where its eyes should have been. Back away, Sam whispered, gripping a branch from the fire as a makeshift weapon. The figure stopped just outside the firelight, its head cocked unnaturally to one side. It raised a hand, skeletal and clawed, and gestured toward the mine shaft. Lucas, Tina whispered. I think it wants us to go. No way, Derek said. We're staying right here. The figure stepped back into the darkness and disappeared, but the tapping continued, louder now, as though daring us to follow. Against better judgment, we ventured toward the mine at dawn. We couldn't leave without understanding what had happened, or so I told myself. The air grew colder as we approached, and the tapping grew louder. Inside the mine, the walls were slick with moisture, and the air smelled of rust and decay. We found the shrine in a cavern near the back. Candles had burned themselves out, their wax frozen in grotesque shapes. Symbols covered the walls, spiraling and chaotic. A rusted pickaxe leaned against a stone altar, and at its center sat a doll made of twigs and cloth. It's a curse, Tina said, her voice trembling. The miners disturbed something they shouldn't have, and now they're trapped here. It's just old junk, I said, though my voice sounded hollow. I reached for the doll. Lucas, don't, Sam shouted. But it was too late. The moment my fingers brushed the fabric, the ground shook, and the mine roared with the sound of collapsing stone. The shadows came alive. Figures with hollow eyes emerged from every corner, their forms shifting like smoke but solid enough to trap us. Tina screamed as one reached for her, its clawed hand grazing her shoulder and leaving a welt. Derek swung his flashlight wildly, the beam cutting through the darkness, but not the figures. "We need to leave something," Tina sobbed. "An offering to the shrine." "It's not real," I shouted, though even I wasn't sure anymore. The spirits were closing in, their hollow eyes fixed on us. Derek threw his watch onto the altar. Take it and let us go." Nothing happened. The spirits advanced. "Lucas," Sam shouted, his voice desperate. "Do it! Leave the camera!" I hesitated. This camera was my livelihood, my passion. But the figures were reaching for us, their claws outstretched. I set the camera on the altar, my hands shaking. Tina knelt, whispering a prayer. The figures froze. Slowly they began to dissolve, their forms fading into the walls of the mine. The tapping stopped. The air grew still. We stumbled out of the mine, battered and shaken, but alive. No one spoke as we packed up camp. The journey back to the RV was a blur, the trail almost unrecognizable in the daylight. The only sound was Tina's quiet sobbing. Back home, I tried to edit the footage from my phone. The files were corrupted, filled with static and shadows that shifted unnaturally. When I unpacked my bag, I found my camera sitting inside, perfectly intact. But when I turned it on, the only image it showed was the shrine. The twig doll stared back at me with hollow eyes. I haven't been back to Kmore. I don't think I ever will. Some things are better left undisturbed. My name is Jacob Perez, and in the spring of 2005, I took my RV out to Idaho's remote Sawtooth National Forest. After a 20-year career in construction, I was ready for some quiet. Or at least, that's what I thought. I picked a spot way off the main camping loops, down a twisting gravel road that didn't look like it had seen a vehicle in years. Just me, my RV, and a couple of fishing rods. The first few days were paradise. I fished, hiked, and even managed to make myself laugh with my attempts at gourmet cooking over a campfire. It was as close to heaven as I could imagine. But then things got strange. It started with little stuff. Twigs snapping too close to the RV at night, muffled noises that I chalked up to animals. I ignored it, figuring a few critters weren't going to scare me off. On the third night, though, it got harder to ignore. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a scratching sound against the side of the RV. I thought it might be a bear, so I flipped on the outside lights and scanned the clearing. But there was nothing there. Just the empty darkness of the forest. So quiet it felt wrong. The next morning, I decided to go for a hike, hoping a long walk would shake off the weird vibes. I packed a lunch, stuffed my water bottle in my backpack, and headed toward a small clearing I'd scouted out earlier. As I made my way through the thick pines, I stumbled upon something that stopped me cold. A pile of bones. They looked too big to be from a small animal, maybe even human. But they were picked clean. I had no intention of sticking around to investigate. I backtracked fast, my mind racing. Could be an animal graveyard, I told myself. Maybe a predator's leftovers. But the whole way back, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every crunch of leaves felt magnified. Every rustle in the bushes set me on edge. By the time I made it back to the RV, I was sweating, and not from the hike. That night, I double-locked the RV door and kept my flashlight within arm's reach. It was a stupid comfort, but somehow it made me feel like I had some control. Around midnight, the scratching came again. Only this time, it was louder. More insistent, like nails scraping down the side of the vehicle. I froze, listening as it moved from the back of the RV toward the door. The flashlight felt useless in my hand. I wanted to yell to scare off whatever was outside, but fear locked my voice in my throat. Then, a heavy thud against the door. I practically jumped out of my skin. The scratching stopped, replaced by a low chuckle. Not a wild animal, not even close. I didn't sleep at all that night. By dawn, I was a wreck. But I wasn't about to sit around and wait to be terrorized. I packed up my gear and planned to leave right then and there. But when I went to start the RV, the engine just sputtered. I tried again. Nothing. My hands shook as I opened the hood. Wires had been yanked clean out, some of them twisted into knots. Whoever or whatever was messing with me was playing a sick game. There was no choice but to hike out. I grabbed my bag, the flashlight, and a hunting knife I'd stashed in a drawer, then headed toward the main road, hoping I'd find someone who could give me a ride to the nearest town. The hike felt endless, the silence around me oppressive. After about an hour, I heard footsteps behind me, soft and measured, like someone was deliberately following at a distance. I stopped, turned around, but there was no one there. Nothing but trees, shadows, and that gnawing sense of dread. I tried to laugh it off, figured I was just scaring myself. But then the footsteps picked up again, faster this time, closing the distance between us. I didn't wait. I bolted forward, heart pounding, barely aware of the ground under my feet. I stumbled into a clearing, lungs burning, vision tunneling. I had no idea where I was going, but anywhere was better than right there. The forest closed in around me, dense and dark, every shadow a potential threat. Just when I thought I'd lost him, I stumbled into another clearing, and he was waiting there, grinning, like he knew exactly where I'd end up. I backed up, glancing around, desperate for any kind of weapon. My hand closed around a thick branch, and I swung it with everything I had. It connected with his shoulder, and he staggered. But he didn't go down. Instead, he laughed. A harsh, guttural sound that echoed in the trees. "You're not the first one I've caught out here," he sneered, his voice low and mocking. "And you won't be the last." He lunged, knife slashing toward me. I blocked with the branch, but his strength was relentless, his movements practiced, like he'd done this 100 times. My mind raced. He wasn't just some lunatic. He was experienced, deliberate, a predator who knew these woods like the back of his hand. We circled each other, him taunting me, my every nerve on edge. Suddenly, he lunged too close. I managed to shove him backward, knocking him off his feet. Without waiting to see if he'd get back up, I turned and sprinted, fueled by pure survival instinct. I broke through the trees, finally reaching the main road. A car was coming down the road. I ran in front of it, waving my arms. The driver, a middle-aged woman with wide eyes and a confused expression, slammed on the brakes. I threw myself into the passenger seat, shouting for her to go. She didn't ask questions. She just hit the gas, and we sped away, leaving the forest and the nightmare behind. As we drove, I glanced back, half expecting to see him standing there watching us go. But the road was empty. The forest, silent. When we reached the nearest town, I thanked the woman and called the sheriff. They sent a team out to investigate. But by the time they reached my campsite, it had been ransacked, the RV torn apart, and in the clearing where I'd last seen him, they found more bones, old and new, scattered like some kind of twisted collection. The sheriff told me later they'd been trying to catch a man named Jonah Gray, a backwoods drifter who'd been linked to missing persons cases in 3 states. They never found him, though. Not in the woods. Not anywhere. I didn't stick around to find out if they ever did. I came to Tar Hollow State Forest to find myself again. After the accident, I'd lost my confidence, my edge. Guiding people through the wilderness had been my passion. But that day, when the storm came out of nowhere and I made the wrong call, it left me shaken. Now I felt like an imposter, a fraud who couldn't trust her own instincts. The forest was supposed to help me, its quiet strength, its endless trails, its simplicity. I needed that. I parked my RV at a secluded site near Pine Lake, away from the few other campers who might still be around this late in the season. The forest was a cocoon of orange and gold, the leaves starting their slow march toward winter. It was beautiful, peaceful, until it wasn't. The first night started with the light. I was sitting by the fire, watching the flames dance and listening to the occasional rustle of the forest when I noticed it. A faint glow deep in the trees, bobbing gently like a firefly. At first, I thought it was someone with a flashlight, another camper maybe, or a park ranger making rounds. But the light didn't behave like it should. It moved too smoothly, weaving between the trees in slow, deliberate arcs. I stood, trying to get a better look. "Hello?" I called, my voice cutting through the stillness. The light paused for a moment. It hung there, hovering just beyond the firelight's reach, before slowly drifting farther into the forest. "Okay," I muttered to myself. "Weird, but probably nothing." Still, I couldn't shake the unease that crept up my spine. I stoked the fire, locked the RV door, and crawled into bed. The next day, I tried to push the memory of the light away. I hiked along the Pine Run Trail, letting the rhythm of my steps and the crisp autumn air clear my head. That's when I met Jared. He was standing at the edge of the trail, staring out over the ravine below, tall, with a scruffy beard and a pack that looked like it had seen better days. He greeted me with a casual nod. "Not many people out here this time of year," he said, his voice warm but edged with something I couldn't quite place. "Yeah," I replied. "It's nice. Quiet." We fell into step together, and as we walked, he started talking about the forest, the trails, the wildlife, the history. It was clear he knew the place well. "Ever heard of the Lantern Man?" he asked suddenly, his tone shifting. "The what?" He gestured to the trees around us. "It's an old story. Supposedly there's a ghost that haunts these woods, a man carrying a lantern, searching for lost souls. People say he died out here a long time ago, and now he leads others to their deaths." I laughed, but it came out hollow. "That sounds like something out of a campfire story." Jared shrugged. "Maybe, but a lot of people have seen the light." He glanced at me. "If you do, don't follow it, no matter what." That night, the light came back. I was in bed, half asleep, when I saw it through the window, a faint glow drifting between the trees. My heart started to pound. It was the same light as before, but this time it was closer. The whispers began a moment later, soft, faint, just on the edge of hearing. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the longer I listened, the clearer they became. "Come." I froze. How did they know my name? The light moved closer, the whispers growing louder. My head throbbed with their insistent pull, like they were burrowing into my skull. Before I knew what I was doing, I was out of bed, slipping on my boots and stepping out into the night. The forest was suffocating in its silence. The light hovered just ahead, its glow soft and steady. The whispers guided me, their words a jumbled mixture of pleas and commands. I followed the light down an overgrown path, my legs moving of their own accord. The air grew colder, heavier. The trees pressed in around me like they were alive. And then I saw it, a small cemetery, hidden deep in the woods, surrounded by a crumbling stone wall. The graves were old, their markers weathered and leaning. In the center of the cemetery hung a rusted lantern, its glass cracked, but its light still burning. "Hello?" I called, my voice trembling. There was no response, only the creak of the lantern swinging gently in the breeze. I took a step closer. "Don't," a voice behind me warned. I spun around, my flashlight catching Jared's face. What are you doing here?" I stammered. "You need to leave," he said, his voice urgent now. "What's going on? What is this place?" Jared didn't answer. He grabbed my arm, pulling me away from the lantern. But before we could leave, the forest erupted with light. The Lantern Man appeared. He was tall and gaunt, his body shrouded in tattered fabric that seemed to shift and rise like smoke. His face was obscured, but his eyes burned with a pale, ghostly light. The whispers started again, louder now, filling my head with static. "Stay," the Lantern Man said, his voice a low, rumbling growl. I couldn't move. The light from his lantern wrapped around me like a tether, pulling me toward him. My legs felt like lead, my mind clouded with fear and confusion. Jared shouted something, but I couldn't hear him over the roar of the whispers. The Lantern Man raised his hand, and the light grew brighter, blinding. I don't know how I broke free. Maybe it was Jared pulling me away, or maybe it was something inside me, some primal survival instinct kicking in. All I know is that one moment, I was frozen, and the next, I was running. We tore through the forest, the Lantern Man's glow chasing us. The whispers clawed at my mind. My lungs burned. My legs screamed in protest, but I didn't stop. When we finally reached the RV, I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut behind me. Jared was gone. The forest was still. When I woke the next morning, the light, the whispers, the lantern man, they were gone. But the memory of them lingered, a weight I couldn't shake. I left Tar Hollow that day, vowing never to return. But sometimes late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows grow long, I see a faint glow in the distance, and I wonder if the lantern man is still waiting for me. My name is William Smith, and I was 33 when it happened. It was late October, crisp and cold, and I had planned the camping trip as a way to reconnect with my younger brother Ethan and shake off the stress of my job. We decided on Dolly Sod's Wilderness in West Virginia, a place famous for its stark beauty, rocky plateaus, and remote isolation. It sounded perfect. Too perfect, in hindsight. Ethan was 24, full of energy, and always pushing boundaries, while I was the cautious one. This trip was supposed to be a chance to bridge the gap between us, especially after years of tension. My best friend, Vanessa, came along too. At 29, she was the kind of person who believed in crystals and spirits, which I always found a bit silly. But she was kind, and I thought she'd help balance Ethan's impulsiveness with her calming presence. We loaded up my RV early one Friday morning and drove to the trailhead. Ethan was already irritating me, of course. He'd forgotten decent hiking boots, so he had to wear his worn-out sneakers. I made a snide comment about him not taking things seriously, and he fired back with a sarcastic joke about me being the trip dictator. Vanessa stepped in to defuse things as usual, and we rolled into the parking area with an uneasy truce. The wilderness was stunning at first. Fog curled low over the rocky ground, and the stunted trees stood stark against the pale sky. It felt like we'd stepped into another world. We planned to hike a loop trail over 3 days, camping 2 nights before returning to the RV. It was remote enough to guarantee no cell service, but not so far off the beaten path that I felt unsafe. That's what I thought, anyway. We set up camp as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Everything was unnaturally quiet. No wind, no rustling leaves, no birds. Vanessa noticed it first, commenting on how strange it was. Ethan shrugged it off, saying it was just a quiet forest. I told her not to worry, but the silence bothered me too. That night, the unease grew. I woke to a faint tapping on the RV's windows. Tap, tap, tap. At first, I thought it was a branch. Then I realized there were no trees close enough to touch the RV. I nudged Vanessa, who was asleep next to me, but the noise stopped as soon as I moved. I sat frozen in the dark, listening until exhaustion finally pulled me back under. In the morning, Ethan claimed he'd seen someone in the woods while he was stoking the fire. Tall guy, weird looking. He was just standing there, staring at us, he said, grinning like it was a joke. I told him not to make things up to freak Vanessa out, but he insisted it was true. Whatever, I said, brushing him off. Probably another hiker. The next day, I made the mistake of leading us off the main trail. I wanted to find a hidden vista I'd read about online, something with a great view of the valley below. The overgrown path I chose wasn't marked on any map, but I was confident we'd find our way back. We didn't. After about an hour, we stumbled into a clearing littered with bones. Deer, rabbits, maybe other animals I couldn't identify. They were arranged in a spiral pattern, bleached white and perfectly placed like some twisted art installation. Ethan laughed nervously and joked about hillbilly voodoo, but Vanessa looked pale. We shouldn't be here, she said, clutching the quartz necklace she always wore. I agreed. For once. We turned back, but the feeling of wrongness stayed with us. By the time we reached camp and the sun was setting, I was exhausted. My legs ached, and the tension between Ethan and me had worsened. He'd spent the entire afternoon mocking my decision to leave the main trail, calling me Captain Compass and pointing out how lost we'd been. We ate in silence, the fire crackling in the growing dark. Vanessa stayed quiet too, staring out into the woods. There's something out there, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Something watching us. Jesus, Vanessa, Ethan groaned. Not this skinwalker crap again. She shot him a sharp look. Don't say their name, she hissed. Skinwalkers, Ethan said, grinning as he leaned closer to her. Skinwalkers. I rolled my eyes and told them both to knock it off. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Vanessa was right. The forest seemed alive with shadows, shifting just beyond the firelight. I told myself it was my imagination. But then I heard it, my voice, calling from the woods. Ronald. It was faint but unmistakable. Ronald, help me. My blood ran cold. I looked at Vanessa, who had gone rigid. Did you hear that? I whispered. She nodded. It's not real, she said quickly. Whatever you do, don't go out there. But Ethan, of course, didn't listen. Relax, he said. It's probably just an echo or something. He grabbed his flashlight and started toward the tree line. Ethan, stop, I shouted, but he was already moving. He didn't get far. As soon as he stepped past the first row of trees, a figure emerged from the shadows. It looked human at first, tall and gaunt, with long limbs and pale skin. But as the light hit its face, I realized it wasn't human at all. Its features were stretched and distorted, like a grotesque mask. Its eyes were hollow, empty pits. Ethan, I whispered, but he was frozen, staring at the thing. The creature tilted its head, then opened its mouth. Ronald, it said in a warped, guttural voice that mimicked mine perfectly. Ethan stumbled back, dropping his flashlight. The beam swung wildly, catching glimpses of claws and sharp, uneven teeth. The creature stepped forward, its joints bending unnaturally. I grabbed Ethan, yanking him back toward the fire. We barricaded ourselves in the RV, locking the doors and pulling the curtains shut. The creature followed, circling the vehicle. Its clawed fingers scraped against the metal, slow and deliberate. It whispered our names, mimicking each of us in turn. Vanessa was shaking, clutching her necklace and muttering what sounded like a prayer. It's a skinwalker, she said, her voice trembling. It's trying to lure us out. What do we do? I asked, my heart pounding. Salt, she said suddenly. Do we have salt? I scrambled through the cabinets until I found a shaker. Vanessa grabbed it and began sprinkling it around the doors and windows, chanting softly. The scratching stopped, but the whispers grew louder, more desperate. Ethan, pale and shaking, stared at the door. It's not going to leave, is it? No, Vanessa said grimly. Not unless we drive. But the RV wouldn't start. I turned the key again and again, but the engine only sputtered. Outside, the creature howled, a low, guttural sound that made my skin crawl. We stayed locked in the RV all night, listening to the creature pacing outside. At one point, it stopped whispering and began banging on the walls, hard enough to make the vehicle shake. Vanessa kept chanting, clutching her necklace like a lifeline. At dawn, the noises stopped. The forest was silent again, eerily so. When I tried the engine, it roared to life like nothing had happened. We didn't waste any time. I threw the RV into gear, and we sped down the dirt road, not looking back. As we reached the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The creature was standing at the edge of the forest, watching us. Its hollow eyes seemed to follow us, even as we drove away. Ethan hasn't spoken about that night since. Vanessa refuses to go camping ever again. As for me, I can't forget the way it mimicked my voice. Sometimes when I'm alone, I hear it again, soft and distant, calling my name. Ronald, help me. I'll never go back to Dolly Sods. And if you're smart, neither will you. My name is Jacob Johnson, and this happened back in 1996 out near the ragged coastline of Maine. I had this idea of finding some peace, so I borrowed my uncle's RV for the summer, thinking I'd get some fresh air, recharge from life. I figured I'd get in some solo time, a few fishing trips, some quiet nights. That's how I ended up at a park near Black Harbor, a little nowhere town that didn't even get cell reception back then. This wasn't a famous national park or even one of those scenic overlooks that people make pilgrimages to. It was just woods, rough and thick, fading into a rocky coastline that nobody seemed to care about. I was a few days into my quiet escape, living off canned beans on a half-empty propane stove that hissed with a little too much attitude for my taste. The most exciting part of my day was waiting for the rain to pass so I could take out my fishing rod. I didn't expect much more than sea salt air and seagulls. It was halfway through my fourth day sometime in the late afternoon, that I heard what I figured must be kids from the local town messing around. The voices were faint, echoing through the woods in some distant way that made it hard to place them. I thought about walking down to see what was going on, maybe throwing a rock or two to scare them off if they got too close, but I didn't think much of it. By evening, though, something had shifted. I heard footsteps, not the quick, careless crunch of sneakers, but deliberate, slow steps. I was in the RV, scratching down a grocery list of things I'd need on my next trip back to town when I caught the sound. It was steady, creeping up around the corner of the RV. It hit me that I hadn't seen another soul out here since I'd arrived, and that didn't sit right. I mean, who comes out to this kind of place aside from someone with a taste for quiet or trouble? I kept still, waiting for the person to pass or show themselves, but there was only the slow, shuffling drag of footsteps. I tried to listen for the sound of multiple feet or voices, but it was dead silent except for that single shuffle. Against my better judgment, I opened the RV door and stepped outside. Nothing, just trees swaying in the evening light. But my instinct told me to keep quiet. I could still feel something out there, hiding, the kind of presence that prickles the hair on your neck and makes you regret stepping out of safety. I stayed there, scanning the tree line, listening. I almost thought I'd imagined it until I spotted something strange, half hidden between the trees, a figure, still as stone, facing away from me. The guy looked like he was part of the forest itself, cloaked in grime, with torn, mud-stained clothes hanging off him like a loose second skin. He didn't move. He didn't breathe. Just stood there, as if rooted to the ground. Now, I don't scare easy, but something about this man felt like a bad omen. I cleared my throat, thinking maybe he was some lost hiker or drifter, but he didn't flinch, didn't even look at me. Finally, I called out something casual, like asking if he needed directions. Still nothing. After a long moment, he turned, slow, like he was trying to remember how to move. His face was something I'll never forget, but not because it was scary exactly. It was hollow, if that makes any sense. This blank expression, like he'd forgotten what it meant to be human. He took a step forward, just one, like he was testing the ground. I backed up so fast I almost tripped. I tried to laugh it off, told myself he was just some messed up camper, but the way he looked at me, it was like he wasn't looking at me at all, just through me. I ducked back into the RV, my heart racing, and locked the door. It felt stupid, locking up, but something about him felt off, like he wasn't just some regular guy lost in the woods. I figured he'd wander off, but minutes later, I heard him shuffling again, this time closer to the RV. I looked out the window and saw him standing right there, not more than 10 feet away. His face twisted into this deadpan stare that sent a chill down my spine. Then came the whispering. Low, muttering sounds, barely audible, like he was talking to someone only he could hear. At first, I thought he was addressing me, but then I realized he wasn't looking at the RV at all. His head tilted, and he mumbled something about payment and lost souls. The words were scattered, fragmented, like someone trying to piece together a broken sentence. I sat there watching him, my heart pounding so loud I thought he'd hear it, but he just kept muttering, almost in a trance. At that point, I was just about ready to pack it up and find somewhere else to park. I reached for my bag, ready to throw some stuff together, when the RV suddenly rocked. I heard metal groaning, and something slammed into the side with a force that shook the whole rig. I was paralyzed for a second, gripping the edge of the table as the guy outside went silent. All I could hear was his breathing, loud and ragged against the thin walls of the RV. I heard a scratching sound, nails or something, scraping along the side, followed by a soft thud, as if he was testing the edges, feeling out the RV like it was some sort of animal he was trying to corner. I kept still, my back pressed against the wall, listening to every sound. I'd never felt fear like that. This primal kind of terror that kicks in when you realize you're trapped. The scratching stopped, and in the silence that followed, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps receding. I took a breath, thinking maybe he'd finally left, but then I smelled something foul. It was a metallic, rotten scent that crept through the vents, filling the air inside with a stench so bad it turned my stomach. I gagged, covering my nose, and nearly bolted for the door. Before I could, I heard him speak again. His voice was low and guttural this time. He muttered louder, "Must be paid." I froze, not sure if he was talking to himself or if he was giving some kind of twisted warning. Either way, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I grabbed my bag and edged toward the door, every instinct screaming at me to get out of there. I took a quick look through the window and saw him walking away, his figure disappearing into the trees. I bolted, taking off through the woods in the opposite direction. The sound of his footsteps echoed somewhere behind me, and for a moment, I thought I could hear him muttering again. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I'd cleared the tree line and hit the gravel road. My feet ached, and my lungs burned, but I didn't care. I just kept running, putting as much distance as I could between me and that place. Hours later, I found a small gas station by the highway and told the cashier everything. He gave me this look, like he'd heard it before, then mumbled something about an old man who'd gone crazy years ago, back when the town was still booming. He said the guy used to wander the woods, talking to himself about debts and payments, claiming to be some sort of collector. Local legend had it that he went mad after his family drowned in a storm. The story was that he'd gone feral, taking to the woods, driven by some twisted sense of revenge or justice. I don't know if I believe in all that. All I know is that I saw him, heard him, and every time I think of that muttering, "Debt must be paid," I feel a chill that doesn't fade. I don't know who he thought I was or what debt he imagined I owed, but I'll tell you one thing. I'm never setting foot near Black Harbor again. Some debts you just don't pay. When I left the city, I was desperate for peace. After a messy divorce and years spent staring at screens, I wanted silence. Real silence. Not the muffled hum of traffic or the constant buzz of electronics, but the quiet only nature could offer. That's how I ended up in Mohan State Park, alone in my old RV, parked on the edge of the Clear Fork Gorge. The park was stunning, especially in the late afternoon light. Trees stretched endlessly in every direction, their leaves a tapestry of green and gold. The air smelled clean, untouched by asphalt or fumes. It was perfect, at least at first. The first day was uneventful. I hiked the main trails, snapping a few photos with my phone, and spent the evening cooking a simple meal on my RV's small stove. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a rare kind of contentment. This was what I needed. No emails, no ex-wife, no one telling me what to do or who to be. Just me in the woods. But by the second day, things began to feel off. It started when I noticed the trail. I had been walking back to my RV after a long hike when I spotted it. A faint path branching off the main one, almost hidden by overgrown bushes. It was narrow, barely more than a line of packed dirt, and it twisted sharply into the woods. Something about it tugged at me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I was just tired of the predictability of the main trails. Whatever it was, I stepped off the beaten path and onto the faint trail. The air felt different as I walked, heavier, quieter. The usual sounds of the forest, birds chirping, leaves rustling, seemed muted, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. After a few minutes, I found the ruins. At first, I thought it was just a pile of rocks, but as I got closer, I saw the remains of a chimney and the rotting beams of what must have been a small cabin. A rusted metal lantern sat in the dirt, its handle broken. The ground was littered with shards of pottery and what looked like animal bones. A shiver crawled up my spine. Someone lived out here, I muttered to myself. The idea seemed impossible. This part of the park was miles from any road, and the trail was nearly invisible. Why would anyone build a cabin here? I snapped a photo and turned back toward the RV, eager to put the strange scene behind me. That night, the noises started. I had just crawled into bed when I heard it, a faint snapping sound, like someone stepping on a twig. I froze, my heart pounding. Raccoons, I told myself. Or maybe deer. I wasn't exactly deep in the wilderness, so wildlife was normal. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, and far too heavy to belong to an animal. They circled the RV, crunching the dry leaves and stopping occasionally, as if whoever or whatever was out there was listening. I grabbed my flashlight and swung open the door, shining the beam into the trees. "Hello?" I called, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Is someone out there?" The forest stared back at me, silent and empty. After a few minutes, I retreated inside, locking the door and double-checking the windows. Eventually, the footsteps faded, and I convinced myself it was just a hiker passing through. Nothing to worry about. The next morning, I stopped by the visitor center to report the strange noises. Leah, the park guide on duty, greeted me with a friendly smile, but it faltered when I described what I'd heard. "You were near the old trapper's cabin, weren't you?" she asked, her voice low. I blinked. "Trapper's cabin?" she nodded. "It's an old story. Back in the early 1900s, a man built a cabin deep in the woods, far from anyone else. They say he was reclusive, didn't trust people. One day, he just vanished. No one knows what happened, but some locals think his ghost still wanders the forest." I couldn't help but laugh. "Ghosts? Come on." Leah shrugged. "Believe what you want, but I'd stay away from that area if I were you. People say the forest gets strange near the cabin." I left the visitor center feeling annoyed. Ghost stories were fine for campfire entertainment, but I wasn't about to let a local legend ruin my weekend. That night, the disturbances grew worse. I was halfway through dinner when the lights in the RV flickered and went out. I swore under my breath, grabbing a flashlight to check the breaker. As I fumbled with the panel, I heard the footsteps again. Closer this time, circling the RV like a predator sizing up its prey. The flashlight beam caught something on the ground. Footprints. Human footprints. Large and deep, as if whoever made them was heavy. My breath caught in my throat. "Okay," I muttered, trying to steady myself. "Someone's messing with me." Grabbing my hiking boots, I stepped outside, determined to confront whoever was out there. But the second I stepped into the clearing, the forest fell silent. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive stillness that pressed against my ears. That's when I saw the first figure. It was pale and thin, barely more than a shadow against the trees. It stood perfectly still, its face obscured by darkness. Then it moved, not toward me, but away, disappearing into the woods without a sound. I didn't follow. Instead, I locked myself in the RV, sat by the window gripping a kitchen knife, and watched the forest until dawn. By the time the sun rose, I'd made up my mind. I had to go back to the cabin. I needed answers. The trail felt even more oppressive in the daylight. The air was thick, and the silence was absolute. When I reached the clearing, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A small, rusted knife lying in the dirt. Next to it was a notebook, its cover warped with age. I picked it up carefully, flipping through the yellowed pages. Most of the writing was illegible, but a few sentences stood out, scrawled in jagged letters. "It watches from the trees. Don't disturb the woods. The forest is alive." A chill ran down my spine. As I turned to leave, the ground beneath me seemed to shift, the dirt rippling like water. The trees creaked, their branches twisting unnaturally. And then I felt it. A presence. Something unseen, massive, and ancient. Watching me from every direction. I ran. The RV was my only sanctuary, but even there I wasn't safe. The lights flickered. The floor trembled. The air grew thick with the stench of damp earth. Through the window, I saw the pale figure again, joined by others. Shadows slipping between the trees, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. The ground beneath the RV began to groan, roots writhing like snakes. I turned the key in the ignition, praying the engine would start. It roared to life. I slammed my foot on the gas. As the RV lurched forward, the figures began to move, their blank faces turning toward me. The roots clawed at the tires, but the momentum was enough to break free. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest shrinking in my rearview mirror. I never went back to Mohan State Park. Whatever was in those woods, it didn't want me there. And I was more than happy to stay away. But sometimes, late at night, I dream of the forest. I hear footsteps outside my window, and I swear I can feel its eyes on me. The forest doesn't forget, and neither do I. My name is Noah Brown, and I'm 36 years old. This happened last fall when I decided to take my first solo RV trip to Spruce Knob Lake in West Virginia. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a way to escape the wreckage of my divorce and prove to myself that I could handle life on my own. I was tired of feeling like a failure, and this trip was my attempt at reclaiming some confidence. Looking back, I realize how naive I was. The forest doesn't care about your pride. I pulled into the campground late in the afternoon. The drive had been longer than expected, thanks to winding mountain roads and a temperamental GPS that insisted I make turns onto non-existent paths. Spruce Knob Lake lay in a valley, surrounded by dense forest, the kind of place that felt untouched by time. Before heading to the lake, I stopped at a small gas station on the edge of town to fill up and grab a few snacks. The attendant was an old woman with gray hair pinned in a tight bun. Her eyes had the kind of intensity that made you feel exposed. "Heading to Spruce Knob, huh?" she asked, her voice raspy. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "A couple of days by the lake should be peaceful." Her expression darkened. "Don't go wandering the woods after dark, and if you see a lantern, you turn the other way." "A lantern?" I chuckled nervously, hoping to break the tension. "I'll keep that in mind." But as I drove away, her words lingered in my mind. By the time I reached the campground, the sun was dipping below the tree line. I parked the RV near the edge of the lake and set up a basic campsite. My gear was minimal: a rented stove, a secondhand flashlight, and a cheap folding chair that creaked every time I shifted my weight. It was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every small sound. The rustle of leaves, the soft lap of water against the shore, the occasional groan of the wind through the trees. Around 9 p.m., as I was reading by the dim glow of my lantern, I noticed something strange. A flickering light in the woods across the lake. It wasn't the steady beam of a flashlight or the glow of a campfire. It moved erratically, like an old oil lantern swaying in someone's hand. At first, I thought it might be another camper. But the more I watched, the more unsettling it became. The light moved deeper into the trees, then stopped, then blinked out. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But that night, as I tried to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, watching. The next morning, I decided to explore one of the trails that looped around the lake. The air was crisp, the leaves a vibrant mix of red and gold, and for a while, I felt like I'd made the right choice coming here. About an hour into my hike, I heard it. Soft, rhythmic giggling. A child's laughter coming from somewhere ahead. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the trees. No response. As I rounded a bend, I saw her, a little girl sitting on a rock by the trail. She looked about 10 years old, with dark hair and a pale face. She was wearing old-fashioned clothes, a long skirt and a cardigan that seemed out of place. "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping closer. She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on something in the distance. "Are you lost?" I tried again. She turned her head slightly, just enough to look at me out of the corner of her eye. Then she stood and walked into the forest without a word. "Wait," I called, hurrying after her. But when I reached the spot where she disappeared, there was no sign of her. Just a muddy child's shoe sitting on the ground. By the time I got back to the RV, the clouds had rolled in, turning the afternoon gray and heavy. I tried to push the encounter with the girl out of my mind, telling myself it was just a weird coincidence. Maybe she was a local kid playing in the woods. That night, things got worse. The electrical system in the RV started acting up. The lights flickered erratically, and the radio turned on by itself, blasting static. My flashlight died, even though I had just put in fresh batteries. I lit my lantern for some semblance of control, but the flame cast dancing shadows on the walls, making the RV feel smaller, more claustrophobic. Then came the sound of footsteps. They circled the RV, slow and deliberate. I peered out the window but saw nothing. Still, the sound continued, crunching leaves and snapping twigs just outside. I locked the door and sat on the bed, gripping a kitchen knife I'd brought for cooking. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, the silence was almost worse. Then a voice broke the stillness. "Stephen," it said, a child's voice. Against every instinct, I opened the door. The forest beyond was shrouded in darkness, but there it was again, the flickering light. The lantern hovered at the edge of the woods, swaying gently as if beckoning me closer. And then I saw her, the little girl, standing beneath the light. "Help me," she whispered, her voice carrying through the still air. I stepped out of the RV. My legs moved almost against my will. The lantern retreated into the forest, and I followed. The girl's figure was always just out of reach. The trail grew steeper and more treacherous, the ground soft and uneven beneath my boots. The lantern led me to the edge of a ravine, its rocky walls plunging into darkness. At the bottom, I saw something glinting, a small mirror, cracked and streaked with dirt. The little girl stood beside it, her pale face illuminated by the lantern's eerie glow. "Jump," she said softly. "What?" I stammered, my voice trembling. "You have to jump," she repeated. Her voice wasn't pleading anymore. It was cold, commanding. I looked down at the ravine, at the jagged rocks below. The lantern hovered above the abyss, flickering like it was waiting for me to obey. Something in me snapped. "No," I said, my voice firm. The girl's face twisted into something monstrous. Her eyes darkened, and her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. "You don't get to choose," she hissed, her voice no longer human. I reached into my bag and pulled out my journal, the one thing I'd brought to document my journey to rediscover myself. Without hesitation, I hurled it into the ravine. The lantern flared violently, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. The girl screamed, a sound that seemed to tear through the fabric of the night, and then she and the lantern vanished. I stumbled back to the RV, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The electrical system was working again, the lights steady, the radio silent. I packed up and left before the sun rose, driving until I was miles away from Spruce Knob Lake. A week later, I found something waiting for me in my apartment. Sitting on the kitchen counter was an old oil lantern, its glass cracked and filled with ash. When I picked it up, I heard it, soft, rhythmic giggling, echoing from somewhere deep inside. I haven't camped since. The wilderness isn't always what it seems. Sometimes it's better to stay lost in the chaos of the city than risk finding what waits in the silence of the woods. My name is James Stevens, and this happened to me back in 2002 while camping in Mount Rainier National Park. I'd borrowed my cousin's RV for the first time. He said I was due for some real scenery therapy, as he called it, away from the stress and noise of the city. I had just wrapped up a divorce, and my mind was cluttered. Nature felt like a good reset button. I set up at Cougar Rock Campground, a secluded part of the park with tall pines and a stream that burbled quietly just out of sight. Peaceful, until the silence starts creeping up on you. The kind of silence that makes every sound, like a twig snapping or water trickling, seem 10 times louder. I parked the RV near the forest's edge, half a mile from the nearest camper, figuring the solitude would be good for me. Less human interaction, more time staring at clouds and mountains. Around mid-afternoon, I met another camper. His name was Russell, an older guy with a scraggly beard and a perpetual frown. He told me he'd been camping there for years, always alone. He said he liked the solitude, the natural rhythm of the place, whatever that meant. He had this rough way of talking, every word thick like he was chewing on gravel. Friendly enough, though, and I thought it was kind of nice to have a fellow loner around. We talked a bit about the area, and then he mentioned something about strange folks drifting into the park lately. People who didn't seem to belong, as he put it. I shrugged it off, but I did notice that Russell's campsite was a mess, with empty cans and old camping gear scattered around like he'd set up for the long haul. I got this off feeling, like he wasn't there just for the peace and quiet, but I brushed it off. He was just another stranger in the woods. No more, no less. By sundown, I was back at my RV, thinking a quick dinner of instant noodles would do just fine. I cranked up the little camping stove, ate in silence, then decided to go for a short walk by the water, flashlight in hand. The stream was a faint line of silver under the moonlight, but everything else had fallen into darkness. I'd taken just a few steps when I saw someone else on the trail. Not Russell. This guy was tall, with wild hair, clothes that were patched and frayed, and a scar that ran from his left cheek down to his neck. I gave him a nod, the casual, keep your distance nod people give in the wilderness. He didn't respond, just stared back, his eyes lingering a bit too long. I kept walking, but I could feel his gaze following me. It was like the guy was sizing me up. Back at my RV, I locked the door and made sure the windows were secure. I had just settled in to get some sleep when I heard footsteps. Light ones at first, like someone trying not to be heard. I thought maybe it was Russell. Maybe he'd had a bit too much of whatever he was drinking by the fire earlier. So I ignored it. But then the footsteps grew louder, then stopped, right by the side of the RV. A minute later, there was a light knock on the door. I froze, listening, my mind racing through who it could be. No one else was around. Not this late. I ignored it, hoping whoever it was would take the hint. But then came another knock, louder this time. I crept up to the small window by the door and peered out, just enough to catch a glimpse. It was the scarred man from earlier. He was standing there, his head tilted, a sick smile stretching his mouth like he'd found exactly what he was looking for. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to keep calm. I hadn't brought a gun, something I was seriously regretting at this point. But the guy hadn't seen me yet. Maybe he'd just leave if I stayed quiet. Then, in a voice just loud enough to cut through the walls, he said, "Hey, Brandon, I know you're in there." The blood drained from my face. How the hell did he know my name? I didn't remember mentioning it to anyone except Russell, and even then, it was in passing. My mind scrambled through every option. Stay silent? Open the door and try to talk him down? Grab something heavy and defend myself? I reached for a frying pan, the heaviest thing within arm's reach. Not exactly a weapon, but better than nothing. I crept toward the door, thinking maybe I could give him a hard enough swing to make him rethink his plans. But just as I was about to take a breath and steady myself, the guy pounded on the door. Hard. Enough force to shake the whole RV. "Brandon, open up. I'm not leaving until we talk," he said. His tone was calm, like he was asking for a cup of sugar instead of trying to break into my camper. Then I heard it. A scraping sound, like metal against metal. I looked down and saw a thin blade, maybe a pocket knife, slowly working its way through the RV door lock. A wave of panic surged through me, and I did the only thing I could think of. I pushed against the door as hard as I could, holding it in place with my weight. The blade slipped, and I heard him curse under his breath. For a second, I thought maybe I'd scared him off. But then, the guy's face appeared in the window, eyeing me with a mix of annoyance and amusement. "You don't make this easy, do you?" he muttered. I must have looked terrified because he laughed, low and hollow. He tapped the window, pointing at me like I was a bug in a jar. That's when I caught the movement behind him. A dark figure moving out of the tree line. Slowly, deliberately. Russell, he must have heard the noise and come over to check things out. Russell didn't say a word. He just stood there, watching. For a second, I thought he was going to help me, that he'd scare this guy off. But he didn't. He just watched. His face expressionless, as the guy kept trying to force his way in. I pounded on the window, yelling for Russell to help, to do something, but he stood there, unmoved. And then I realized, Russell was in on it. Suddenly, I was a trapped animal. The frying pan felt absurd in my hands, 2 against 1, and I was stuck inside a fiberglass cage. There was no way I'd make it if they got in. My only shot was to run. I dropped the pan, shoved open the emergency hatch in the roof, and scrambled up. The cold air bit against my face. I heard them both cursing below as I climbed, stumbling over myself in the darkness. I was barefoot, the sharp gravel digging into my feet as I ran for the tree line, my heart hammering like a drum. The RV was small, but in that moment, it felt like an ocean between me and those 2 maniacs. I didn't stop to look back. I just kept running. Eventually, I reached the ranger station, my feet bloody, my body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. They found Russell and his friend later that night, hiding out near the campsite with a whole stash of stolen camping gear and weapons. Turns out they'd been robbing campers for months, using the park's seclusion to get away with it. In the end, Russell claimed he'd just been there by coincidence when the scarred guy attacked me. But the scarred man wasn't so lucky. After a short scuffle with the cops, he was arrested, with enough evidence of his outdoor exploits to keep him locked up for life. It turned out he had a habit of finding interesting campers to mess with, using the solitude of the park as his own twisted playground. That's what went down that night at Mount Rainier. And I still don't know what Russell's deal was, whether he was in on it from the start or just a bystander too afraid to stand up. But one thing's for sure, I'll never be borrowing an RV for scenery therapy again. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as if the forest were holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I'd heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps. One locals swore disappeared and reappeared as if it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it, film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera, set it up, and filmed a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore are fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker, a stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in spiraling symbols that didn't look like any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving. The trees closed in tighter, and the trail became fainter, more overgrown. Soon, it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping the camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment, there had been a clear path. Now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me. Alone. In the fog. Okay, I muttered. You've dealt with worse. I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel uneasy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not mine. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the forest. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. "Hey," I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. "You lost too?" The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. He seemed off. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes, like he wasn't entirely there. "I've been walking for days," he said, his voice hoarse. "The trail, it keeps changing." "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. "No one's okay out here." I frowned, feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "The trail, it moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave. I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. Look, I have a GPS, I said, pulling it out. We can find our way back. The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. It won't help. The forest is messing with it. I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get this guy some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago would be choked with brambles. When I looked back, trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees, thick, twisted trees that looked like they had grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct voices calling out from the mist. "Nate," I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked Eli. He nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us." "The forest." I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree, high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside, water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around like he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen. Shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me. The fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail and the strange, shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal. The mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he'd never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me. And I had a feeling it was waiting somewhere in the mist for me to return. The forest around me was too quiet. I'd been sitting by the campfire outside my RV, immersed in the silence for hours, but now something felt off. The kind of off you feel in your gut before your brain catches up to what's happening. No wind, no rustling in the leaves, just dead stillness. That was the first thing I noticed when I pulled up to this remote campsite deep in Mount Hood National Forest. A place like this should have been full of life. Birds, insects, something. But the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the distant hum of the radio I'd brought along. I needed quiet after everything that had happened over the past year. I wasn't looking for distractions, just isolation. After my wife's death, nothing made sense anymore. People kept telling me I needed to move on, but the noise of life, the sympathy, the well-meaning advice, the friends who didn't know what to say, became unbearable. So I packed up and hit the road, hoping the wilderness would give me space to think, or maybe stop thinking altogether. I thought the forest would help. It had, until now. The radio's static broke the silence, a sudden burst of garbled noise that made me jump. I turned my head toward the RV, where the old ham radio sat inside. I hadn't even touched the thing in hours. It was an antique I'd brought along to mess around with in my downtime, but the signal had been dead all day. No stations, no chatter, nothing. Until now. I stood up from the fire, walked over to the RV, and ducked inside to check the radio. The static was louder, more insistent, like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite get there. I twisted the dials, searching for a clearer signal, but all I got was more white noise. Then, through the crackling, I heard it. A voice, faint and garbled, speaking numbers, 1, 3, 7, 8, 9. The numbers repeated over and over, mechanical and cold, like a voice from an old number station. It didn't make sense. I was miles from anywhere, and this was supposed to be a dead zone. No signal, no interference. The voice paused for a moment, then the numbers started again. 1, 3, 7. It sent a chill through me, but I told myself it was just some rogue signal bouncing off the atmosphere. Maybe a military transmission. There were logical explanations for this kind of thing. I was sure of it. But the way the numbers repeated over and over felt wrong. Like the message wasn't for just anyone, it was for me. I shut the radio off. My fingers were trembling slightly. I wasn't here for this. I needed quiet, not some weird radio signal rattling around in my head. The next day, I tried to forget about the radio. I spent the morning hiking through the woods. The towering pines loomed overhead like silent giants. The air was cool and damp, the sky just a sliver of gray through the dense canopy. But something gnawed at me, a faint buzzing at the back of my mind. No birds, no animals, just silence. When I returned to the campsite, the radio was on again, static blaring from the speakers. I hadn't touched it. I stepped inside the RV, staring at the radio like it might come to life. The static was louder now, more intense. I could feel it in my bones, like the vibration from a low hum in the ground. And beneath the static, the numbers were back. 1, 3, 7, 8. I slammed my hand down on the off switch, killing the sound. My pulse was racing, my mind scrambling for an explanation. It had to be a glitch, something with the wiring, maybe a stray electrical signal. I'd worked with enough technology over the years to know that things sometimes did strange things when you weren't looking. But the numbers, the way they were so clear, so deliberate, I shook it off and stepped back outside, trying to push the growing unease away. That's when I noticed the man standing at the edge of my campsite. I hadn't heard him approach. He was just there, tall, scruffy, wearing a weathered jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked like a camper, but there was something about the way he stood, stiff and tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. "Hey!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "You lost?" The man looked at me, his face tight with anxiety. "I heard it too," he said. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. "Heard what?" "The signal, the numbers," he said, glancing toward the RV. "I've been picking it up on my own radio. It's not normal." My mouth went dry. "You've heard it too?" The man nodded. "I'm Ben," he said, stepping closer, his voice low. "I was camping a few miles down the road. I've been getting static, voices, weird electrical interference. My GPS stopped working. My cell phone drained to 0 in minutes." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. What do you think it is? Ben shook his head, his eyes darting toward the trees. I don't know, but it's not natural. The way the signal moves, it's like it's getting closer. I didn't know how to respond to that. I was a man of logic, of science. Signals were signals. Glitches were glitches. But there was something about the way Ben spoke, the fear in his eyes, that made my skin crawl. That night, the radio came to life again. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the campfire and the peaceful silence of the woods, but the static was louder than before. The numbers were clearer, more insistent. 1, 3, 7, 8. Ben was sitting across from me, his hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. His eyes constantly scanned the dark forest around us. He hadn't relaxed since he showed up, and I couldn't blame him. There was something wrong here, something I couldn't explain. You think it's some kind of broadcast? I asked, more to fill the silence than anything. Ben shook his head. I don't think it's a broadcast at all. What do you mean? He hesitated, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. I think it's a warning, or a signal from something out there. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. A warning from what? Before I could ask, the static on the radio cut out for a moment. There was only silence, the kind of silence that presses down on you, that makes your skin prickle with anticipation. Then a sound, a soft rhythmic clicking, like something metallic tapping against wood. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it toward the trees, but the beam only revealed darkness. The clicking grew louder, echoing through the forest. And then, through the radio, a voice crackled to life. We see you. My blood ran cold. Ben's eyes widened, his face pale. What the hell was that? I whispered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. The voice repeated, distorted and mechanical. We see you. I stood up, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The clicking sound was closer now, coming from all around us, moving through the trees. The forest seemed to pulse with energy, the air growing thick and heavy, like the atmosphere itself was alive. I think we should leave, Ben said, his voice tight with fear. For once, I agreed. The next morning, I found Ben's tent abandoned. His gear was scattered around the clearing, but there was no sign of him, no footprints, no note. Just the cold, empty forest and the low hum of static that had settled into the air like a living thing. I tried to follow his tracks, but they vanished in the thick underbrush. It was like he'd walked into the trees and disappeared. The GPS on my phone was useless, spinning me in circles. The battery drained faster than I'd ever seen. The static in my ears grew louder the further I went, like the signal was inside my head, vibrating through my skull. The numbers were back too, repeating over and over, etched into my mind. 1, 3, 7. By midday, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected. An old, dilapidated radio tower hidden deep in the woods. The metal was rusted, vines crawling up the sides, but it was still faintly humming with power. I climbed the tower, every step echoing in the stillness. My heart hammered in my chest. At the top, I found the source of the signal. A small glowing device pulsing with an eerie cold light. It didn't belong here. It wasn't part of the original tower. It was something else, something foreign. I reached out and touched it, and the static in my head exploded. The numbers, the clicking, the voices, it all crashed into me at once. An unbearable cacophony of sound. I stumbled back, nearly falling off the tower as the forest seemed to come alive around me. The lights returned, flickering in the trees, cold and mechanical. The clicking grew louder, more frantic, like something was chasing me. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back to the RV, but the lights followed me, the clicking never far behind. But I managed to get inside and slam the door shut. My hands were shaking as I started the engine, the device still clutched in my hand. As I drove away, the static began to fade, but the numbers never left me. They echoed in my mind, a constant whisper, even as the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror. It's been days now, and I'm still hearing them. 1, 3, 7. I can't get them out of my head, and I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there, whatever sent that signal, knows where I am. And it's not done with me yet. It wasn't my first job, and it sure as hell wasn't supposed to be my last, but something about that night didn't sit right from the beginning. Maybe it was the silence on the dispatch call, or the way the wind howled across the San Rafael desert, as if it knew something I didn't. I should have listened to that instinct, the one that makes your gut twist and your hands clench the steering wheel tighter than usual. But when the money's right, sometimes you take a job you wouldn't otherwise. The rig hummed beneath me as I barreled down I-70, heading west. The sky was bruised with the last light of day, purple streaks fading into a storm building on the horizon. I had a long way to go and no time to waste. They said the cargo was sensitive. He needed to be kept at exactly 20 degrees, and if I messed up, there'd be hell to pay. That wasn't what bothered me, though. What bothered me was not knowing what the hell I was hauling. When they don't tell you what's in the trailer, it's never good. My name's Roy Mallister. Bones to the few truckers who still know me on the road. 45 years old, and I've spent the last 20 behind the wheel. The road used to be a kind of escape for me, a way to outrun the things I didn't want to face. But that was before Carol passed, before I let everything else fall apart, including my relationship with my daughter Emily. Haven't talked to her in years, and I don't think about it much anymore. I'm good at avoiding things like that. But tonight, something felt different. The desert stretched out endlessly on either side of me. Just red rock and dry air as far as the eye could see. I hadn't seen another car in miles, which was fine by me. The last thing I needed was distractions. That is, until the dashboard flashed red and the trailer's cooling unit flickered for the first time. I muttered a curse, pulling the rig over onto the shoulder. I cut the engine, grabbed my flashlight, and climbed out into the gathering dusk. The wind hit me hard, dust swirling around my boots as I made my way to the back of the trailer. I could hear the cooling unit working and stuttering like it was trying to fight off some kind of malfunction. Fumbling with the latch, I yanked open the back door and was greeted with a gust of frigid air. It smelled wrong in there, like cold metal and something decayed, the kind of smell that sticks in your nose and won't leave. I shined my light into the back, trying to figure out what was causing the problem. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping. No, not tapping. Scratching. It was coming from the crate, a large wooden crate strapped down in the center of the trailer, covered in heavy chains. My heart started to pound in my chest, the kind of adrenaline spike that tells you to get the hell out of there. But my feet wouldn't move. I inched closer, flashlight trembling in my grip. The scratching got louder. The crate shifted just slightly, as though something inside was alive. "What the hell?" I whispered, backing away. I wasn't going to open it. Not in a million years. I slammed the trailer door shut and locked it tight, forcing myself to breathe slowly. Whatever was in that crate, I wasn't sticking around to find out. I was just supposed to get it from point A to point B, no questions asked. I climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and pulled back onto the road, telling myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was an animal, I thought. Some government experiment or something. None of it mattered. All I had to do was deliver the damn thing. The radio crackled to life as I accelerated, and I jumped in my seat. Static. Then, through the fuzz, I heard something faint. A voice. A woman's voice. "Roy, why didn't you come back?" My heart stuttered. The voice sounded like Carol's. I smacked the side of the radio, trying to clear the signal, but the static only grew louder. The voice faded, replaced by an eerie, distorted country song, one I hadn't heard since she passed. It was one of her favorites. "No," I muttered, turning the radio off. This was just stress getting to me. The isolation, the weird cargo, and the fact that I hadn't slept in 2 days. That's all it was. That's what I told myself as I sped down that endless stretch of highway. But the farther I drove, the worse it got. The storm hit an hour later, and with it came the figures. I thought they were just shadows at first, shapes in the mist thrown up by the desert sandstorm. But as the wind howled and the sand lashed against the windshield, I could swear I saw them. People walking along the roadside. No, not people. Ghosts. Old men in trucker caps, women in long, flowing dresses. their faces pale and hollow, their eyes dark as the night. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying not to look. If I didn't look, they weren't real. That's how it works, right? I blinked hard, forcing my eyes back on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something, was watching me, following me. The trailer lurched hard, like something had slammed into the back of it. "What the hell?" I shouted, swerving the rig as I fought for control. My headlights cut through the dust, illuminating the desolate highway, but there was nothing there. Nothing but empty miles. The trailer shook again, then came the knocking, loud, rhythmic, like someone was pounding on the inside of the crate. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I was done pretending it was nothing. I was done lying to myself. I had to stop. I had to see what was in that crate. I pulled the rig to the side of the road again, hands trembling as I jumped out of the cab. The wind whipped sand into my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't care. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox and made my way to the back of the trailer. The knocking hadn't stopped. It was louder now, more urgent. With a deep breath, I unlocked the trailer and threw the doors open. The cold hit me again, but this time it wasn't just the refrigeration. There was something wrong about it. The air inside was thick, oppressive, like it was pressing down on me. I raised the crowbar, jammed it under the lid of the crate, and pried it open. And then everything stopped. The wind, the knocking, even the pounding of my own heart. Inside the crate, nestled in layers of straw and old cloth, was something small. It looked like a statue, a human skull, but blackened with strange symbols carved into the bone. It seemed to pulse, like it was alive, like it was breathing in time with me. And then the whispers started. Not from the radio this time, but from the skull itself. Voices swirling in my head, speaking in languages I couldn't understand. But one voice stood out, one voice I knew. Roy. I stumbled back, my heart racing as the skull began to glow with a faint, sickly light. The voices grew louder, and the wind picked up again, howling around the trailer. I slammed the crate shut and bolted the door. I didn't care what they said. I didn't care what I'd seen. I was getting the hell out of there. I threw the crowbar into the cab, jumped behind the wheel, and floored it. The trailer lurched behind me as I tore down the highway faster than I'd ever driven in my life. The storm whipped around me, and through the swirling dust, I could see them again. The figures. They were closer now, standing on either side of the road, their eyes following me. Some of them looked familiar. Faces I'd seen on the road before. Long-dead truckers, friends. Then, as if the storm itself parted, I saw her. Carol, standing in the middle of the road, her white dress flowing in the wind, her eyes locked on mine. I jerked the wheel, swerving to avoid her, but the rig skidded off the road. The trailer jackknifed as it skidded across the desert sand. I barely managed to hang on as the truck groaned to a stop, tilted sideways in a ditch. Silence. I sat there for a long time, staring out into the empty desert, trying to breathe. The storm passed, but I knew it wasn't over. I reached for my phone. No signal. No way out. And then, just as the last light faded from the sky, I saw her again. Carol walking slowly toward me. Her face pale and cold, her eyes filled with something I couldn't understand. "Roy," she whispered, her voice soft but clear in the stillness. "It's time to come home." I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just sat there, waiting as the darkness closed in around me. I didn't believe in ghosts, UFOs, or anything supernatural. I spent most of my career chasing down so-called paranormal phenomena and explaining them with cold, hard facts. That was my job, turning superstition into science, myths into measurable data. The Brown Mountain Lights? They were just another mystery waiting for a rational explanation. That's what I told myself as I drove my RV up the winding roads of Pisgah National Forest. The thick trees closed in on either side. The air was crisp, and autumn leaves scattered across the path. There was a quiet stillness that made the world feel far away. I should have felt calm, excited even. But as the sun began to sink behind the distant ridges, leaving the forest bathed in shadow, I felt something else. Tension. Shaking it off, I parked the RV at the remote campsite I'd scouted. This was supposed to be a solo trip, A few days to get up close and personal with the Brown Mountain lights, interview locals, take readings, and prove once and for all that the lights were nothing more than atmospheric conditions or optical illusions. I had all the gear I'd need: high-resolution cameras, thermal scanners, EMF detectors, the works. I wasn't expecting to find anything supernatural, just an anomaly. And anomalies had explanations. But the moment I stepped out of the RV, a chill ran through me. The trees rustled softly, as if whispering some secret I wasn't meant to hear. "Focus," I muttered to myself, dragging my gear out and setting up the cameras, angling them toward Brown Mountain Ridge. I had a perfect view of the ridge from my campsite, miles away, but clear in the distance. That's where the lights were supposed to appear. By the time I was fully settled in, I was sitting outside the RV, bundled in a jacket, sipping coffee, and staring out into the dark, waiting. The forest was eerily silent. No birds, no wind, nothing. Just stillness. Then, around midnight, I saw them. At first, they were faint, flickering, small orbs of light hovering just above the ridge. I squinted, adjusting the focus on my binoculars. There they were. Three lights bobbing in the air like they were floating on an invisible current. I grabbed my camera, flipping the switch to start recording, but nothing happened. The lens stayed black. The screen dead. "What the hell?" I muttered, fiddling with the buttons. Fully charged and brand new, the camera shouldn't have malfunctioned. I checked the battery, clicked it back into place, and tried again. Still nothing. Frustration surged through me. This was exactly what I'd come here for. The lights, right there in front of me, and I couldn't even capture them. I stood up, grabbing my thermal scanner, but when I flipped it on, the screen flickered, then went dark. "Come on," I whispered, trying to stay calm. The gear wasn't cheap, and none of it should have been failing, but it was, piece by piece. The lights danced on the ridge, growing brighter, closer. My heart raced. I wasn't scared, I told myself. I was just annoyed. The logical part of my brain struggled to make sense of it. Maybe the electronics were glitching because of interference. Some kind of electromagnetic field or something. I took a deep breath, trying to settle my nerves. But the lights, those strange pulsing orbs, kept moving, almost as if they were drifting toward me. The air turned cold, so cold that I could see my breath misting in front of my face. A thin layer of frost started forming on the ground, on the RV windows, on my gear. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, my hands beginning to stiffen in the chill. It didn't make sense. The weather forecast had called for a cool night, but nothing like this. I checked my phone's temperature app. 30 degrees? Impossible. I glanced at my surroundings, feeling the silence close in around me. Then I noticed the lights were no longer on the ridge. They were much closer now, floating just above the treetops, flickering like distant fireflies, but larger. Too large. I watched, heart pounding, as they bobbed and weaved. Their glow cast long shadows on the ground. I pulled out my phone to take a video. The screen flashed, then went black. It wouldn't turn on. Frustration boiled over. I slammed the phone down on the camping table. It bounced. I stood there, fists clenched, trying to keep my cool. This was why people got sucked into believing nonsense, because technology failed at the worst possible moment. The lights weren't supernatural. There had to be an explanation. Maybe the cold was messing with the equipment, or some kind of atmospheric distortion. But then I saw the handprints. Small, faint handprints etched in frost on the RV window. They hadn't been there before. I knew that. I stared at them, my breath catching in my throat. They looked like the handprints of a child, no more than a few inches across. And they were slowly, gradually melting away in the cold. A prickling sensation crawled up the back of my neck. I turned to look at the lights, now hovering at the edge of the forest. Close enough that I could make out their eerie bluish glow. They flickered in the trees, moving in slow, lazy circles, as if they were watching me, waiting for me. The rational part of my mind screamed that it was impossible. There was no way the lights could have traveled that fast. No way they could be this close. I'd seen videos, read reports. They were always distant, spectral, unreachable. But now they felt personal, as if they were beckoning me. I swallowed, my throat tight. Without thinking,
I took a step forward. The cold deepened, pressing in on me from all sides. The frost crept up the sides of the RV, spreading like delicate veins. The temperature continued to drop. My breath came out in ragged gasps, and my vision blurred. The lights drifted deeper into the trees, flickering and glowing, moving in a pattern that felt deliberate, like they wanted me to follow. And I did. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling as I made my way toward the forest's edge. The beam of light was weak, barely cutting through the dark. I kept my eyes on the lights, feeling a strange pull in my chest, like something was urging me forward. As I entered the trees, the world grew darker. The lights danced just out of reach, always a few steps ahead of me, their glow casting an ethereal light on the twisted branches. The forest felt wrong, too quiet, too still. I checked my watch. 2 hours had passed. I hadn't even noticed. My legs ached, and I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no idea how far I'd wandered. The lights flickered again, brightening as they circled a large boulder ahead, and then they stopped, hovering there, motionless. I took a step closer, and that's when the hallucinations began. Shapes, faint figures moving in the trees, shadows stretching unnaturally long. And there, between the branches, I saw faces. Pale, expressionless faces staring at me with hollow eyes. I blinked, and they were gone. Panic set in. I turned to leave, but the forest had shifted. The path I'd taken was no longer clear. Everything looked the same trees, the same twisting branches. The lights pulsed behind me, glowing brighter as if taunting me. I ran. My breath came in short, sharp bursts. My heart raced in my chest as I stumbled through the underbrush, trying to find my way back to the campsite. The lights flickered at the corners of my vision, but I ignored them. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Light, quick footsteps crunching through the frost behind me. I didn't dare look back. I ran faster, my flashlight flickering and dying in my hand. I broke through the tree line, gasping for air, and saw the RV ahead, a welcome sight. But the air around it was colder than ever. The frost was so thick on the windows that it looked like snow. And there, pressed against the glass, were more handprints, dozens of them. I scrambled inside, locking the door behind me, and collapsed on the floor, panting. My entire body trembled with cold and fear. The lights were still out there. I could see them through the frosted windows, flickering in the trees, growing fainter as the night wore on. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. By dawn, they were gone. The temperature returned to normal and the frost melted away, but I didn't feel safe. Not anymore. I packed up the RV and drove out of Pisgah National Forest, my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. I'd come here to find an explanation, to debunk the Brown Mountain lights. But what I found was something else, something I couldn't explain. And I knew, deep down, that the lights weren't just a phenomenon. They were something more. Something ancient. Something dangerous. Something that had almost taken me. I don't know what they wanted, but I'll never go back to find out.
It had been 4 months since the divorce was finalized, and I was still trying to wrap my head around it. The life I had imagined, the woman I thought I would grow old with, it was all gone. That's why I decided to take the RV out to Mount Hood National Forest for a long weekend. I needed to get away from everything. No people, no reminders, just me and nature. My therapist said it would be good for me to clear my head and reconnect with something that didn't remind me of failure. Honestly, I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try something. If I stayed home, I would have just drowned myself in the silence of my empty apartment. This trip, I told myself, would be different. I could handle the quiet out here. I arrived in the late afternoon, pulling the RV into a spot near Timothy Lake. It was a beautiful area. Tall Douglas firs surrounded the lake like silent sentinels, the water reflecting the sky like a mirror. There were no other campers nearby, which was exactly what I wanted. Solitude. I parked, shut off the engine, and took a deep breath. The air was cool, crisp, with that faint scent of pine needles. Perfect. For a moment, I thought I could finally breathe again. After setting up a small campfire, I sat back in my foldable chair, staring at the fading light over the mountains. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Peace. That's what I needed. But as the sun dipped lower, the quiet became overwhelming. There was no wind now, no rustling, no animal sounds. Just me, sitting in a bubble of silence. I checked my watch. It was just after 6 p.m. That's when I noticed it. It was too quiet. The forest around me, which should have been alive with the sounds of birds and insects, was dead silent. At first, I figured it was just a lull, but as the minutes dragged on, the silence pressed down on me like a weight. I could hear the blood pumping in my ears, the soft crunch of every movement I made in my chair. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I shrugged it off. Maybe this was what true isolation felt like. No noise, no distractions, just me and my thoughts. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement between the trees. It was subtle, a shadow slipping between the trunks, just far enough away that I couldn't get a good look. I froze, squinting into the woods. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that played tricks on my mind. I scanned the tree line, waiting for the shadow to return, but saw nothing. The trees stood still, their branches unmoving in the dead air. Must be a deer, I muttered, forcing myself to relax. The wind picked up briefly, rustling the leaves. I sighed, relieved to hear some kind of noise again. I grabbed a few more logs and threw them onto the fire. The crackling wood was comforting, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. I told myself I was just on edge from being out here, alone, with too much time to think. After eating a quick meal, I decided to call it an early night. The silence was getting under my skin, so I climbed into the RV, locked the door behind me, and settled into the small bed in the back. My phone had no signal, of course, but I wasn't planning on talking to anyone anyway. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to let my mind go blank, but the silence didn't let me rest. The RV was soundproofed, but even then I felt like something was missing. No crickets, no owls, nothing, just the absence of sound. I felt trapped inside my own head. Every little shift of the mattress or rustle of my blanket amplified in the quiet. Eventually, I drifted off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with a start. I wasn't sure why at first. There hadn't been any loud noises or nightmares, just silence. But something was wrong. My skin prickled with unease. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and glanced around the RV. The windows were fogged up, and the air felt heavier, somehow oppressive. I heard something outside. No, that wasn't right. I heard nothing outside. I swung my legs out of bed and stood, listening closely. It was the strangest sensation, like my own breathing was distant, muffled, as though I wasn't entirely in my own body. I moved toward the window and wiped away some of the condensation with my sleeve, peering into the blackness beyond the RV. For a long time, I saw nothing, just trees and shadows, and then movement. This time, I was sure. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, just barely visible in the moonlight. Tall, unnaturally still, like it was waiting for something. My heart leapt into my throat as I strained to see more clearly. It didn't move, just stood there watching. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky. The figure didn't respond. I backed away from the window, heart pounding, my mind racing. Was it another camper? Some kind of ranger? No, there was no way anyone would be out here this late without a sound. I checked the door. It was still locked. Good. But I felt exposed, vulnerable, knowing that whatever was out there was watching me. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it out the window, sweeping the beam across the clearing. The figure was gone. Just like that. Vanished. As if it had never been there. The next morning, the forest was still eerily quiet. No birds, no animals, just the constant oppressive silence. I tried to shake off the unease from the night before, but it clung to me like a wet blanket. I told myself I was just paranoid, that the solitude was messing with my head, but something about the way the air felt today. Something was off. I decided to take a short hike to clear my mind, hoping that getting out of the RV would make me feel better. But as I ventured down the trail, that feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every few minutes, I'd glance over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something behind me, but the trail was empty. That's when I saw it again, a figure, this time in the distance, standing between the trees just off the trail. It was the same one from last night, tall, gaunt, and still. My heart hammered in my chest as I squinted, trying to make out more details. But before I could move, it slipped behind the trees and disappeared. I ran toward the spot where I'd seen it, my boots pounding against the damp earth. When I reached the trees, there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to show that anyone had been there at all. I stood there, catching my breath, feeling the silence pressing down on me like a vice. That's when I noticed something strange. The forest around me was completely still. Even my footsteps had stopped making noise. I stopped my boot on the ground, but I heard nothing, not even the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. Panic surged through me. I clapped my hands together. Nothing. No sound. My breathing was shallow, frantic, but it was like I was listening to it from far away. The world had gone completely, impossibly silent. And then I saw them. Not just one figure, but several, moving between the trees. Their bodies blended with the shadows. They were everywhere, circling me in complete silence. My heart raced, but I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear anything. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away. My legs felt heavy, every step muted, like I was running underwater. The forest shifted around me, the trail disappearing into the thick fog that had rolled in, disorienting me further. Somehow I made it back to the RV. I slammed the door shut, locking it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but still no sound. I grabbed my phone, hoping to call for help, but it was useless. The screen flickered, the GPS spinning in circles. I was trapped. For the next few hours, I stayed inside the RV, pacing back and forth, trying to calm myself down, but the silence never lifted. I couldn't even hear my own thoughts anymore. Just the crushing weight of nothingness. And then, as the light began to fade, I saw them again, the silent ones. They were standing in a circle around the RV, their faces blank, their eyes hollow. There were no features, no mouths, just smooth skin where their faces should have been. They stood perfectly still, watching me through the windows, their bodies unnervingly thin and elongated. I banged on the window, screaming, but of course, no sound came. They didn't flinch, didn't move. They just stared, waiting. Desperation clawed at me. I couldn't stay here. I needed to leave, but the RV wouldn't start. Every time I tried, the engine sputtered and died, as if something was draining the life out of it. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, stepping outside. The silent ones didn't move, didn't react. But as I walked toward them, the air grew colder, the silence even more oppressive. My footsteps made no sound. My breathing was barely there. I felt a hand on my shoulder and spun around, expecting to see one of them behind me. But there was nothing, just the fog swirling around me and the figures waiting in the distance. In that moment, I realized what they wanted. They weren't going to kill me. No, that would be too simple. They wanted me to join them, to become one of them. The silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a part of them, and it was seeping into me, stealing my voice, my thoughts, my very sense of self. And if I stayed here much longer, I knew I would lose everything. I don't remember how I made it out. The next thing I knew, I was driving far away from the campsite, from the silent ones. The sound of the engine, the tires on the road, it was all faint, like I was still caught in their grip. But at least there was something, a reminder that I hadn't completely disappeared into that silence. It's been weeks since I got back, but I can still feel it. The quiet follows me, lingers in the corners of my apartment. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I can feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting. And I know that one day, they'll come for me again. This time, I won't be able to run. I needed this escape after the year I'd had. Peace was the only thing I craved. My ex-wife had taken the house, my boss had taken my sanity, and I was left holding nothing but a bag of resentment and a camera. So here I was, finally alone in Black Rock Canyon, Joshua Tree's hauntingly beautiful desert. They said these nights were the darkest in the country, perfect for the long exposure shots I needed for my portfolio, but also hopefully for some much-needed clarity. The sky was ink black. spattered with a smattering of stars, and my RV felt like a fragile shell in this immense desert, which stretched out infinitely on all sides. I set up my tripod, thinking how strange it was to have so much space and yet feel the weight of something closing in, pressing down on me from every angle. I framed the shot, the rock formations jagged against the horizon like bones clawing up from beneath the desert. Just as I clicked the shutter, something caught my eye. Something odd up on a nearby ridge. A pile of stones stacked in a rough tower stood silhouetted against the fading light. I squinted, unease prickling the back of my neck. It wasn't a cairn, at least not like the ones I'd seen before. These rocks were stacked too high and too precisely, almost ritualistic in their placement. And yet I'd seen no one here, not a soul for miles. I shook it off and went back to shooting. The night, with all its dark expansiveness, was settling in, and I was ready to forget everything. That's when I heard it, a low humming sound reverberating through the thin air. It was faint, just a vibration, but I felt it in my bones. I stood still, listening, straining my ears as it grew louder, rhythmic, almost like a chant. I whipped around, expecting to find some desert animal or even another hiker, but there was nothing. Just the stacked stones up on the ridge, now looming in the moonlight, their shadows long and spindly like fingers stretching down toward me. "All right," I muttered, forcing a laugh. "Maybe you're just getting a little too comfortable out here." I forced myself back into the RV, telling myself it was just the wind, a desert echo, a trick of the open space. But that hum stuck with me, burrowing into my chest like a thorn I couldn't shake. I didn't think much more of it until the middle of the night when I was jolted awake by a noise inside the RV, a clicking, snapping sound. My heart hammered as I sat up, listening. Nothing. I climbed out of bed, checking the windows, and noticed my camera's light blinked. That's when I saw them. The pictures. They'd been taken while I was sleeping. Distorted, blurry images of me lying in bed, the RV's dim interior barely illuminated. What the? I muttered, flipping through them, my mind scrambling for an explanation. There was no way I'd taken these. The only other option was that someone had been in here while I was asleep. My pulse raced, and I checked the door, feeling a wave of relief to find it locked. I told myself the camera was just malfunctioning, a faulty shutter, maybe. But still, the hairs on my arms stood on end. In every photo, just beyond the frame, there was a shadow, a faint blur, like someone was standing just out of sight. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see someone staring back at me. But there was nothing, just the desert, empty and still. Reluctantly, I climbed back into bed, but sleep was out of the question. Every creak of the RV felt amplified in the silence, and I lay awake until the first light of dawn finally broke the tension. In the harsh light of morning, my nerves felt foolish. Determined to shake the feeling, I threw on my gear and hiked up to the ridge where I'd seen the stacked stones. The desert had that strange, quiet hum again, as if it were alive and breathing. The closer I got, the more stones I saw. They were everywhere, scattered across the sand, piled high, some forming a rough circle. At the center, I found something I hadn't expected, a rusted metal plaque, half buried in the dirt, worn down but legible. I brushed the sand off, reading the words aloud, feeling the weight of each one. "Do not disturb the desert's watchful ones." I swallowed, feeling an odd chill run through me. I'd read enough stories, heard enough lore, to know that some things were better left alone. I made my way back to the RV, but that feeling of being watched clung to me. I was only a few feet from the door when I saw it. Someone standing at the edge of the rocks, staring down at me. My heart skipped. I called out, "Hello?" But there was no answer. They just stood there, perfectly still, a tall figure with shadowed features. I blinked, and they were gone. That night, I set up my camera again, trying to capture the stars, hoping to drown out the unease and work. But as the hours passed, the desert seemed to close in around me, and the silence grew almost deafening. Around midnight, the humming started again, that same low drone, a chant. I shut my eyes, telling myself it was a desert sound, a trick of the wind. But when I opened my eyes, something shifted at the edge of my vision. There it was again, that shadowy figure. This time, closer, standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. Its features were obscured but unmistakably human. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its eyes on me, cold and unblinking. "Who are you?" I shouted. But it said nothing. It just stood there, silent, watching. I felt the chill seep into my bones as the figure slowly lifted a hand, pointing toward the ridge and the circle of stones. My mind screamed at me to stay in the RV, to lock the doors and wait for morning. But something inside me pushed back. A bitter voice whispering that I was here to face my demons, even if they were made of nothing more than shadow and sand. I stepped out of the RV, heart pounding, and aimed my flashlight toward the figure. But the light revealed nothing. The figure was gone. My camera, though, my camera kept snapping on its own, capturing photo after photo. I checked the screen, flipping through them with growing horror. The pictures showed me standing in front of the RV, but behind me, there was someone, a figure standing in the shadows, grinning. Its face half-formed, almost human but twisted, as if made from sand and shadows. I stumbled back, fighting the instinct to run, and nearly tripped over the piled stones near the ridge. My breath was ragged, and I felt something cold brush against my neck. A whisper, low and distorted, echoing in the emptiness. "Ethan," it hissed. I snapped. I hurled my camera toward the stones, smashing it on the rocks, hearing it shatter into pieces. I don't know why I did it, but something told me that's what it wanted, that whatever this thing was, it had fed off my memories, my photos, my presence. The desert was silent again. I felt it let go of me, the weight easing, and I staggered back to the RV, trembling, feeling a strange sense of loss and relief. I drove all night, the desert a blur of shadows in my rearview mirror, refusing to look back. But as dawn broke, I felt a strange calm settle over me, a peace I hadn't felt in years. I didn't know what I'd seen, but I knew it was gone, left behind with the shattered pieces of my camera and whatever had haunted me for so long. Weeks later, I found a package in the mail. No return address, no note. Just a simple envelope. Inside was a single photo. It was one of my last shots from Black Rock Canyon, a photo of me asleep in the RV, peaceful, unaware. But in the corner of the image, a shadow hovered over me, its hand reaching out, as if trying to pull something out of me. And there, scrawled across the back of the photo, were 5 chilling words. "You will come back someday." The forest was supposed to be my escape. I drove the RV deep into the Blue Ridge Mountains, hoping the solitude would offer some kind of peace. I had been out here a few times before, never this deep though, but it had always been calming. Nature had a way of quieting the noise in my head. After I left the job, the silence became my companion, even though it haunted me with memories I wasn't ready to face. The accident that had ended my career as a paramedic. Every night, it replayed in my mind, always the same horrific details. But with each viewing, I saw a new way I could have saved the child. A different decision, a split second sooner. And maybe it didn't matter. I was here now, alone. The sound of the gravel crunched under my tires as I parked off an old dirt road. It was oddly satisfying. I turned off the engine, and for a moment there was bliss. No noise except for the rustle of trees in the wind. This was what I needed. No sirens, no screaming, just the mountains. I grabbed my bag and climbed out, stretching my legs before heading over to the old fire lookout tower nearby. It was a relic, long abandoned and forgotten by most hikers. The wood was graying, peeling away from years of exposure, but it stood firm, a silent sentinel watching over the rolling hills. Something about the place had always intrigued me. It had a gravity to it, like it was holding secrets that only those who ventured close enough could learn. I planned to spend the weekend here, at least 3 days before I had to go back to reality. I didn't need much, just the stillness, the mountains, and a break from the memories. I set up camp near the RV, built a small fire, and tried to let go. But the quiet was different this time. The first night, it started with whispers. I was sitting by the fire, watching the flames flicker against the trees, when I thought I heard voices, not nearby, but carried on the wind. Faint, like a conversation just out of reach. I strained to listen, but they faded, lost in the rustle of the leaves. Probably just my mind playing tricks, I told myself. I hadn't slept well in weeks, and the quiet, while peaceful, was unnerving in its own way. After a while, I retreated to the RV, exhausted, but the voices lingered in the back of my mind, soft murmurs that tugged at my thoughts. As I lay down, I told myself it was nothing, just echoes of people who had camped here long before. The wind could carry sounds in strange ways out here. But the deeper I fell into sleep, the louder they grew, until I jerked awake, covered in sweat. There were no voices, just the oppressive weight of silence. I stared at the ceiling, the same question running through my mind. Was this peace or something else? The next morning, things started to get strange. I woke to find my watch blinking, frozen at 2:47 a.m. I tapped the screen a few times, but it refused to budge. Strange. When I checked my phone, it was dead, despite being fully charged the night before. I chalked it up to bad luck, but when I stepped out of the RV, the sun seemed higher in the sky than it should have been. It was late morning, but it felt like I had only just fallen asleep. I spent the day hiking, keeping my mind occupied. The trail was familiar. I'd hiked this ridge before, but something about it felt different. Landmarks I swore I'd seen on the way up seemed out of place, or worse, missing. And every time I thought I was making progress, I'd find myself right back where I started. The same twisted tree, the same rock formation. A loop. The disorientation didn't set in all at once. It was a slow, creeping unease that settled in my bones. The wind felt wrong too, as if it was carrying something. I couldn't quite hear those whispers again. Faint, distorted, carried on the breeze. This time, they were closer. By nightfall, the voices were louder. They weren't whispers anymore, but full conversations, disembodied words spoken in tones I couldn't place. It was like someone was just out of view, talking, laughing. At first, I stayed by the fire, trying to block it out, but the longer I sat there, the clearer the voices became. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was as if they were replaying over and over, fragments of words lost on the wind. I stood up, scanning the tree line. Shadows flickered just beyond the light of the fire. My breath caught in my throat. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking in the stillness. No answer. The hairs on my neck stood up as I watched the shadows shift. A figure. It moved between the trees, far enough that I couldn't see clearly, but close enough to make my pulse quicken. My first thought was that it was another hiker, maybe someone lost. But when I took a step toward it, it vanished, gone, as if it had never been there. I grabbed my flashlight, pointing it into the woods, but the beam of light revealed nothing but trees. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks again, but my gut told me otherwise. There was something here, something I didn't understand. I retreated to the RV, locking the door behind me. But even inside, the silence was heavy. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. The voices were still there, faint now, but constant. It felt like someone was standing just outside the RV, talking in circles, over and over. The next morning, I hiked to the old fire lookout. I don't know why. Something about the tower drew me in, like I needed to be there. It was old, dilapidated, and crumbling, but it held a strange power. When I reached the top, I could see for miles. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched out in every direction, green and endless. I expected to feel some sense of peace, but instead, a deep dread settled in my chest. The lookout wasn't empty. It was filled with the remnants of people who had come here before me. Old camping gear, torn sleeping bags, cans of food long since expired, graffiti scratched into the wooden beams, names etched into the walls. And something else, carved into the center of the floor, was a symbol. A crude spiral, looping in on itself. I knelt down, running my fingers over the grooves. It looked old, weathered, like it had been there forever. The voices returned, this time louder, clearer. I whipped around, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the tower was empty, just the wind whistling through the cracks in the wood. I ran my hands through my hair, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was very wrong here. The ridge, the lookout. It wasn't just an old campsite. It was a trap, a loop, and I was stuck in it. I tried to leave that afternoon, packed up the RV, started the engine, and drove down the winding road that had brought me here. But no matter how far I drove, the landscape didn't change. The trees, the rocks, it all blurred together. The same stretches of road repeating over and over. After what felt like hours, I found myself back at the campsite, the fire now cold and dead, sitting in the exact same spot. My heart sank. I tried again. This time, I took a different route. But once again, the RV looped back to the same spot. It was as if the mountain wouldn't let me leave. By nightfall, I knew the truth. The whispers weren't random. They weren't in my head. They were echoes. Echoes of the past, of people who had been here before me, people who had tried to leave and failed. I sat in the RV, staring out the window at the darkening woods. The figures had returned. This time, there were more of them. They moved between the trees, watching me, waiting. One by one, they stepped into the clearing, surrounding the RV. I could see them now, faded, distorted, like shadows of people long gone. Their faces were blank, their movements slow and deliberate. They said nothing, but I could hear them. Their voices, the same words looping over and over. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking. This was it. I was stuck. Trapped in their endless loop, just like they were. The door creaked open. I don't remember what happened next, only that I woke up the next morning, sitting by the cold, dead fire. The RV door was wide open. The woods, empty and still. But the whispers were gone. For now. I don't know how long I've been here. Days? Weeks? Time doesn't seem to work the same way anymore. Every time I think I'm getting closer to an answer, I find myself right back where I started. I'm not alone on this ridge. There are others. I can hear them sometimes, their voices echoing. If you'd told me a week ago that I'd be clutching my best friend's arm, hiding from a shadow creature in the Utah desert, I'd have laughed. That's the sort of stuff reserved for ghost stories told around the campfire, right? But now, as I crouch low in the sand, staring at the shadow shifting through the rocks like smoke, the chill in my spine tells me I was wrong. Tyler and I had been planning this trip for ages. It was supposed to be a break from our relentless lives back in San Francisco. When my promotion came through, I convinced him we had to celebrate by camping across the Southwest, ticking off bucket list spots along the way. Dead Horse Point was the prize, the place I'd looked forward to the most. Its isolation, haunting beauty, and honestly, its reputation for eerie legends that I couldn't resist. We pulled in late, just as the sun was setting over the canyon, casting a blood-red glow across the twisted rock formations. I remember that unease settled over me then, the kind that sends a tiny shiver from the back of your neck all the way down. Tyler, ever the skeptic, brushed it off as I pointed out that we were alone in this remote part of the park. Great, more room for us, he joked, snapping photos of the stunning desert horizon. It took us a bit longer to find a spot than we'd planned. Our GPS was acting weird, leading us down dirt trails that seemed to spiral into nowhere. Eventually, Tyler managed to maneuver our RV into a flat area. Not ideal, but secluded and scenic. Perfect, he said. I wasn't so sure. When we finally set up camp, the daylight had faded, leaving us bathed in the cold blue of twilight. I fiddled with our old portable radio, hoping to get some music to fill the silence, but the thing just crackled with static before sputtering and dying altogether. Tyler laughed, but I caught the way his eyes darted around the empty landscape. It felt almost oppressive, the way the land seemed to watch us. You and that ghost-loving imagination, Tyler teased, rummaging through his bag. Maybe it's a sign, or just Utah's finest weather. Ha, very funny, I replied, forcing a laugh. But this place has stories, Ty. Have you heard of the skinwalker? The what? He chuckled, turning to face me. Mia, are you seriously bringing up ghost stories? Not ghosts, exactly, I said, trying to hide how uneasy I felt. Skinwalkers are shapeshifters in Navajo legends. They can mimic people, even voices, to lure you away. People say they're evil spirits in human or animal form. Tyler looked at me with that familiar, infuriating smirk. Oh yeah? Then let's summon one here. Skinwalker, Skinwalker, show yourself! I hissed for him to stop, but he just laughed and returned to the viewfinder on his camera, snapping photos of the canyon, now fully cloaked in darkness. I closed the RV door, hoping to shut out the chill that had suddenly settled into my bones, but that shiver, that sense of being watched, it lingered. It was maybe an hour later when the first sound came, a light shuffling sound outside, like footsteps in the gravel. My heart skipped and I shot Tyler a look, but he was already putting on a brave face, pulling his boots on to investigate. "It's probably an animal," he whispered, winking. "Mountain lions, right?" "Yeah, because mountain lions sound like people," I said, my voice barely a breath. He ignored me, clicking on his flashlight and stepping out. It was quiet, eerily so. Tyler scanned the flashlight across the rocks. The beam cast long shadows. For a moment, I was almost convinced he was right, that we were just being paranoid in the strange silence of the desert. But then we heard it, a whisper. It was faint but unmistakable. "Mia! Mia!" My breath caught in my throat. The voice was scratchy and low, calling my name. I whipped around to face Tyler, but he was frozen, his face drained of color as the voice echoed again. "Did you?" I stammered, trying to find the words. Tyler didn't answer. He just stared, flashlight clutched so tightly his knuckles were white. "Mia, Mia." This time the voice seemed closer, as if it were slipping between the rocks, winding its way through the desert toward us. It sounded familiar too. Too familiar, but wrong. "Let's go inside," I whispered. Tyler nodded, and we backed up slowly, not turning our backs on the emptiness around us. Once inside, I locked the door. Our breaths were rapid in the tight space. Tyler finally spoke, his voice shaking. "Tell me that was just the wind." "I don't think so," I replied, glancing out the window. The night was still, an unnatural stillness that seemed to hold its breath. Just as I was starting to feel a little less tense, there was a sharp knock on the side of the RV. We both froze. Another knock, then another, rhythmic, echoing through the metal walls. Tyler's face paled, and I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my throat. "Who's there?" he called, his voice wavering. The only answer was a slow scrape against the door, a sound that made my skin crawl. I squeezed Tyler's arm. "Don't open it." "What if someone's hurt?" he whispered back, already inching toward the door. But I couldn't shake the feeling that opening that door would be the worst thing we could do. "Just wait." Then, to our horror, we heard it, Tyler's voice calling from outside. "Tyler, help! Come out here!" Tyler looked at me, eyes wide with terror. "What? How?" he stammered. The voice repeated, distorted, stretching his name into a twisted mockery. "Tyler, Tyler." I grabbed his hand, squeezing hard. "Don't answer. Whatever you do, don't answer it." The minutes dragged by, each second stretching into eternity as the voice continued calling, beckoning us. Tyler and I stayed as still as statues, clutching each other. The silence in the RV was thick and heavy. Finally, the knocking stopped, and for a moment, all was quiet. But just when I started to breathe again, the RV rocked violently, as though something massive had slammed into it. Tyler scrambled to the driver's seat, twisting the keys to start the engine, but it sputtered and died. He tried again and again, but nothing. The shape outside pressed itself against the window, casting an elongated, inhuman shadow. It had limbs too long, eyes that glowed with a sickly yellow light. Its mouth was twisted into an eerie mimicry of a smile that seemed to stretch too far. "Oh my God," Tyler gasped, clutching the steering wheel, white-knuckled. "Mia," the creature hissed, its voice a blend of my own and Tyler's, distorted, mocking. "Come outside." I shook my head, my voice trembling. "Don't look at it. Don't listen to it." But it was too late. Tyler couldn't tear his gaze away from that awful face in the window. His breath hitched as the creature's mouth stretched impossibly wide. Suddenly, he screamed, clutching his ears as if to block out the sound. I pulled him away, whispering words I barely remembered from some article on Navajo blessings. Words I didn't even know if I was pronouncing right. But as I spoke, the creature seemed to pause, tilting its head in confusion, almost weakened. Seizing my chance, I dragged Tyler out of his stupor, and together we stumbled out of the RV. The creature's eyes followed us, glowing like embers, as we bolted toward a narrow crevice in the rocks. I held Tyler tight as we crouched in the shadows, watching the thing stalk around our RV, frustrated, snarling. It hissed again, a guttural sound that sent shivers down my spine. Mia, you can't hide. Tyler's hand was clammy in mine, his breath shallow. Mia, what is that thing? A skinwalker, I whispered, my voice barely audible. It's feeding off our fear. Tyler squeezed my hand tighter. What do? We stay quiet and don't look it in the eyes, I murmured, remembering the warning. We wait. Time seemed to slow. The skinwalker circled the rocks, searching, stalking, its low growl echoing off the stone. At one point, it stopped, sniffing the air, its gaze passing right over us, so close I could see the rotting skin around its eyes. We held our breaths, not daring to move. Slowly, the creature slunk away, disappearing into the shadows. The silence stretched on, each second a lifetime. Eventually, we crept back to the RV, praying the creature had gone. Tyler tried the engine again, and miraculously, it roared to life. Without a second thought, we sped down the road, the headlights cutting through the darkness as we left Dead Horse Point behind. By morning, we were back in Moab, dazed, exhausted, and shaken beyond belief. Tyler's arm was bleeding from where the creature had scratched him, and I had bruises from gripping him too tightly. We warned other campers, but no one believed us. Later, as I lay awake in the safety of a crowded campsite, I could still hear it, whispering my name on the wind, lingering in the corners of my mind. Maybe it was waiting, or maybe it was just saying goodbye. Until next time.